A very good evening, everyone. A warm welcome from the Creative Arts Academy. Today, I have a great pleasure in announcing the beginning of the second batch of the Creative Writing Course, which is being designed by Anjum Katyal, our Director of the Writing Department at the Creative Arts Academy. We have a wonderful panel today. We have Sampurna Chattarji joining us all the way from Thane, Chandrahas Choudhury, who all of us love as an author, has joined us all the way from UK, and the session will be moderated by very own Anjum Katyal. I would take this moment to formally introduce all the three people who will be having a discussion today evening. Anjum Katyal is an editor, writer, translator, critic, and educator. She is the director of the Creative Writing Course for Adults and Children at the Creative Arts Academy. She was the chief editor of Seagull Books, Calcutta from 1987 to 2006, and editor of the Seagull Theatre Quarterly, which was, in fact, a very important document from 1994 to 2004. She has served as the director of APJ Kolkata Literary Fest for 8 years. She is currently curator, New Festival of Arts and Ideas, Shanti Niketan. Welcome, Anjum, once again, and we are really looking forward to the second run now.
Thank you very much.
We have Chandrahas Choudhury from UK. I wonder what he's doing in UK and why is he not here with us in Calcutta? He has studied at the University of Delhi and later at the University of Cambridge. He's the author of 3 works of fiction, Days of My China Dragon, Clouds, and Arzi the Dwarf. Also an essayist and literary critic, he writes for the Wall Street Journal, Mint Lounge, New York Times, and Con Nas Traveler. He is also editor of the Anthology of Indian Fiction, India, A Traveler's Literary Companion, published by HarperCollins. Welcome, Chandrahas, and thank you for joining us and taking out time. And also thank you for agreeing to be a part of this course and being a guest faculty here.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. In fact, I was waiting. Why did it take you so long to invite me?
And Anjum is taking her own sweet time. Sampurna Chattarji is a writer, translator, editor, and teacher. 2 of her novels, Rupture and Land of the Well, have been published by HarperCollins. Her translations of Joy Goswami's poetry, who's one of my favorite poets, has been published by Harper Perennial. Her poetry titled Over and Underground in Mumbai and Paris was the result of a collaboration with Kartika Nair. Sampurna is a poetry editor for the Indian Quarterly and teaches writing to design students at IIT Bombay. A very warm welcome, Sampurna, and thank you for taking out time. And also a big thanks for becoming a part of this course and the Academy. Well, over to all of you, and we look forward to listening to all of you about how to write better. Over to you, Anjum.
Thank you so much, Raman. I hope I'm clear. Everyone can hear me.
Absolutely.
I'm not using my earphones, but if I need to, I can always do that.
It's all good. It's all good.
So
and we are here to help you technically.
Thank you. Welcome to everybody who's taken the time and the and joined us today to listen to this discussion. I'm personally delighted that 2 friends of mine who are also writers who I really enjoy reading and whose works I look forward to are here with us today. Sampurna Chatterjee, who's always been a slip of a thing, but I think I've known her since she was a real slip of a thing many years ago, and it's great to have her with us. Chandrahas Choudhury is also a slip of a thing, who I got to know when his first book was being brought out, right? Arzi the Door. I think we did an event around that book, and it was wonderful. That was his very first published novel, and he has been a writer who has done a variety of different kinds of things ever since, and it's been always interesting to keep track of what he's doing and the writing he's producing. So both Sampurna and Chandrahas have been kind enough to agree to come on board as guest faculty for the second round of our creative writing course. And I am really looking forward to it because this is a course that in some ways is very unusual because it's a course that is open to just anybody who really wants to engage with writing. Very often courses are part of university departments or they are designed for people who are serious writers in the sense that they're halfway to publishing their books already. But this is really a course which, if we are to go by last time's, which was the first batch, it has people who are just intrigued by writing, are interested in it, are willing to put in the time to find out what is this creative writing all about, how do you do it, and how do I do it better than I'm doing now. So it's quite interesting because there's a kind of a range of people who come on board for the course, who sign up, and it's great fun because it's really a course which is meant to just a course you're meant to enjoy. It's not competitive at all. We are not about marks and evaluation and assessment. It's really just about reading and learning and discussing and, testing things out for yourself and seeing how it goes. So I'm just hoping that all of you who are signed up for the course, if you're listening, that you have fun. And I'm hoping that Sampurna and Chandrahas also enjoy it very much. So I thought that today we just talk about this thing called creative writing, this thing called writing, which both of our two the writers here today have actually devoted their lives to. They've made a life choice to be writers. And I think that's absolutely interesting and fascinating in itself, given that so many people do do writing, but they do it as a kind of a plus along with something else. So maybe I'll start by asking both of you, at which stage in your lives, or how did this realization come upon you that this is what you really want to do? Was it in college, in school, much later? Maybe Sampurna can start and then Chandrahas can talk about it.
Yeah, thanks, Anjum, for that introduction and also for reminding me of the long years of friendship and association which really binds all of us in a very real way. I think that's becoming increasingly more precious these days. So, to answer your question, I would say that, I would have to say that it's like sounds a bit prehistoric, the answer, because I did begin writing when I was in class two. It was in class two in Darjeeling that, on account of the praise I received from my teacher, Mrs. Wood, on having written a very apparently a successful four-line poem on my desk mate. And it was something we had to do. We had to write a poem on our desk mate. So I wrote a four-line poem, and later Mrs. Wood said to me, Sampurna, that was really good. And I think that was the moment when I realized this is it. I am a poet. And it was in inverted commas at that moment. I, of course, enjoyed thoroughly my growing up years in Darjeeling, feeling poetic, wandering in the hillsides, very conducive atmosphere to poetry, of course, and fiction. I wanted to be like Enid Blyton. I wrote some chapters, exciting 11. I realized 11 characters are very hard to do. Gave it up. Wrote book reviews. I had a little green book in which I wrote book reviews by Sampurna Chattarji. So that was very precautious of me, I now realize. But after a rather strange, I would say strange and slightly destabilizing detour, studying literature in LSR, some 3 years, wonderful, rich years, I found myself leaving literature behind and plunging into advertising. Something about
Really?
the study of literature for 3 years, and I loved it with every bone of my body. But something in the third year, some, I don't know what the kernel of disenchantment was, said that I've had enough of this bookish world. I want to get out into the big bad world, earn money, and make it. So I joined HTA Kolkata, Pondell Road, as a copywriter. Because
Right.
obviously the only thing I could do was write. I gave a copy test, I got in. I was like, okay, now I'm a copywriter. And I started writing my copy. And interesting times, after 2 years in Kolkata, I moved to Bombay. And I think that was the moment of, there are times when you look back, it's all hindsight. You look back and you realize that there is a turning point. And I think for me, that turning point was the move to Bombay. I did work in HTA for, I think, five, moved here in 1995. So I worked for 4 more years in advertising. Loved every second of it, particularly loved the television work, the writing for commercials. I adored the excitement of it, the precision of it, the 30-second honing of it, working with technical people. All of it was absolutely exciting to me. But at the age of 28 and a half, which is where I was at the peak of this exciting career in advertising copy, is when I realized with a start that this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And what I really want to do is go back to that thing I always thought I would become, which is a writer. And that becoming a writer is such a thing. Now, when you say that, you say, like, how does one become a writer? I think my first step was to leave advertising. Something told me that unless I severed this connection, this very exciting life, this very exciting success, this very lucrative job, I would not uh, it's just me wanting to make my life difficult. I often do that. I wanted to leap off into the darkness and start again. And so I did that. I quit in 1999. I still remember in March 1999 with the stated intention of becoming a writer, very, very much to the puzzlement of my GM. And he said, "Why are you leaving? Have you got a better job somewhere? How can we keep you?" I said, "No, no, 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 no. I just want to go and write some books." And he said, "In that case, I'm going to let you go." I'll never forget those words. And put a pressure on myself then, avoided going to South Bombay, avoided meeting people from my old agency, because they would ask me, "So where's the book?" And I was like, "What have I done? Couldn't I just said I'm getting married?" Which I also did. I could have given said something else. And I was like, "No, no, no." So for one whole year, Anjum, I literally hid. 1999 to 2000, I hid. I hid away in exactly this place in Thane. I started writing because I had many ideas. Most of them were ideas for novels. They would get published eventually, and that's how it began. And it was the cutting of that. It was the cutting off of the safety net, I think, that proved to me how much I needed it, and that is
Wow.
where it began in 1999, I would say.
Wow. Okay, so that I have lots and lots of questions for you listening to that wonderfully exciting story. But first, let's get Chandrahas to share his journey with us. Chandrahas, were you a writer from class two?
Maybe even before, who knows? I mean, yes, this is the place where we do get competitive sometimes. Like, when did we start? Well, listening to Sampurna, everybody's story is unique. And to all the people who are listening to us, I think it also becomes clear that while retrospectively it all looks like a journey that, was destined, it really is not. And even your journey to achieving identity with this one word writer has so many chapters. It could be a book by itself for everybody. And at each sort of chapter break, one could have dropped out.
Yeah.
And some people do. I don't think if we look back to our school days, and to those of you who are listening to us, if you think of the person who's the best in English in your class, or even in your university, and you think of what they're doing now, it's very, very rare that verbal ability was translated into verbal creation. And somebody else who never looked that promising, suddenly you see them in the newspaper or in a magazine. And which is to say, my other great passion is sport and football. And if I wasn't right, I'd have loved to be an athlete, but the terrible thing about being an athlete is at 32 or 33, you're close to finished. And the amazing thing I've always felt about being a writer, even with other arts, I feel in music, my mother plays the harmonium very well, but I try to learn and I'm so far behind. I just feel it's a mountain I can't climb because we use language all the time. Anybody with some experience of life and some interest in reading and writing, I think can become a writer at any point in their lives. And I sometimes I teach these week-long workshops these days, and I often find that the people who are a bit older above 30, let's say, ask much more interesting questions and have a much more secure sense of exactly what they want to say because they have some life experience. And I think
Right.
that's what they need a little bit of help with. You have some unique perspective on the world as a result of just having been a human being, lived, traveled, married, had relationships, brought up children, worked somewhere. And India, I think, whenever you go on a train, almost every Indian you meet has something very interesting to say because of the combination of influences. I mean, that way, if I were to be grateful, I feel like I'm a self-made writer, but the one great bit of luck I feel I had in my life, when you set yourself against the vast canvas of literary history, to have been born in India in the year 1980.
Okay.
I think this was the as much luck as I needed, from after which I could make my own luck, and middle class, which allowed my parents to give me as many books as I wanted growing up and stuff.
Right.
And after that, I think, like with Sampurna, I think it's same for all writers who are writers by their mid-30s. They read lots of books in their childhood, so they were verbally very dexterous, and they
Right.
managed to, in their 20s and 30s, have the discipline or the inner calling to translate that into work. I think in my case, I wanted to be a writer long before I was one.
Okay.
And to
That's
some of
interesting.
you who are listening and who have the same either problem or pleasure, it's a combination of both. It may help you. I spent 3 or 4 years, much of it in utter despair, trying to write my first book, while also very occasionally enjoying something that I was doing. And that little, uh, when I finished my first manuscript, I gave it to some of my closest friends to read. And I traveled up to Delhi with it. I printed it out in Bombay. I remember the exact photocopy shop where I was standing waiting for it to come out. I had it spiral bound, so it looked more like a book. And I went up to Delhi, my closest friends from university. I gave it to them and said, I won't sit near you. Read it over the next 2-3 days and let's have a chat. And when they were done, I was already 28 years old. This was my one hope of doing something in my life. They looked at me and said, we really don't think it's that good.
Oh.
And I was in terrible despair. And this was before I'd learned to read my own work, which is a very essential part of becoming a writer. It doesn't come to you right away. Once you're 3 or 4 years into the line, you can read your own work. And even if you can't say how to make it better, you can say that it's not good enough. And that's enough for a while. And it took me a long time to learn this. But I went back home and worked on it some more. And I'm very pleased to say, Arzi the Dwarf, which you also read, Anjum, and you were very helpful when it came out. I think sometimes when I read it, I actually think I've never written better. It's incredible for me to think this. 12 years have gone since I wrote that book. And it's wonderful to know that at every stage of your life, there's some force in your existence that makes you write well. And this changes from time to time. So if you rely on your old skills for a new time in your life, we'll find that the river has run dry. But if you find something new to do, which again, between books, I think is very important to do something interesting with your life. That's the only break you give yourself as a human being. Otherwise, your partner's exasperated with you. You are in this dream state half the time. You don't answer. You disappear in the mornings and stuff. You have little chance in between books.
Right,
so
right.
When we are done, I would appreciate some people asking particular questions, because I think that will draw this out a bit more.
Yeah,
But just
absolutely.
in
We're going
short
to
to
have
say,
time.
yeah,
Yeah, we're
since
going
I
to
was
have time. Sorry. What were you saying,
just to say in
Chandrahas?
short to conclude, because one can go on forever. From the time I've been 17, 18 and adult, there's nothing I ever wanted more than to earn this identity. And I'll just finish with one little story. Lots of people used to come to my house for dinner in Delhi and Bombay the last 10 years, and they would always laugh when they entered the door because there was a little nameplate there. Uh, by the way, my door didn't face the street. It's on the second floor of a self-enclosed building. So it's not as if people were passing by looking at it, but there was a little nameplate which had my name, and right below it said writer. And I was very proud of having met this at Flora Fountain in Bombay. And every day when I left my house, I would go back in. It's sort of like, when you don't have a secure job, you have to remind yourself sometimes of what it is that you do that gives your life meaning. And in all these ways, I think it's an amazing gift to give yourself. Give yourself the gift of reading and writing.
Right. Wow, thank you for that, Chandrahas. So here we have two girls who felt that they wanted to be writers, one who moved on from that and came back to it, and Chandrahas, who, as he said, wanted to be one long before he actually started to be one. So, Sampurna, to go back to some of the things you were talking about, and in a way, Chandrahas said the same thing when he said sometimes you need to do something very different and come back to it, because in between your book you need a break and to do something different with your life. But this very different thing that you were doing, the advertising world, now looking back, as we said, with hindsight seems to sort of really give you lots of clarity. But looking back, how do you feel that as a writer you benefited? You did mention a few things like the precision and things, but looking back, what do you feel helped you in terms of your own writing style and development through your advertising?
Hmm. I'll have to say that I mean, this is something I don't often say in public, but this is an important thing to say, is that much of that 1 year, Anjum, that I said that I spent in hiding, I actually was unlearning a lot of the things that advertising had taught me. And I mentioned that at the back of
Okay.
my first ever poetry book, no, which I just dug out because it's been it's an old one. And I think I'll just say that this idea of grappling with language, and I think the great recognition that I had to face the fact that advertising had also taught me a certain slickness and a glibness of
Right.
craft, and that if I really wanted to be the kind of writer, the serious kind of writer that I've always admired, read, and loved, it would have to be about unlearning. So I've written here how much of my facility for wordplay would be life giving, and how much, and these are strong words, how much corroding acid. Words, once the glib tools of my trade, would now have to be recast as the messengers of my calling. Would I be able to do this? Was this all too fanciful? I didn't think too much about it then. I wrote, and through the writing, I approached a place of greater confidence, a surer sense of craft, and poetic concern. So I think, because I was, especially when I was writing my poetry, I was very conscious that if in advertising it's about how do you sell this, how do you compress this, how do you give it the sheen, how do you cut to the chase, these could be very useful for a 30-second commercial, extremely harmful for a 350-page novel, which is what I was writing right at the beginning. Before I published my poetry, I did work on my draft of Rupture, which got published much later. So I think I had to unlearn, and that unlearning was very, very instructive. So I learned a lot of
Mm.
practical things from my work in that world: how to collaborate, how to be disciplined, how to value somebody else's time and money. But as a wordsmith, I had to unlearn a lot of things.
Okay, okay. And specifically, you're talking about unlearning the glib, smooth facility with
Yes,
words, the quickness with
yes, but
which.
yes, and I think going back to my love in words, which I had once upon a time.
Yeah,
Like to just quickly say is, however, that experience of having worked in advertising did give me a wonderful character and a set of experiences which I put into Rupture. So Jonaki, who
right,
is the in a sense the sutradhar for Rupture, which has so many characters and so many places happening across 24 hours, is, as it happens, a copywriter. So I made her, you know, take some of the experiences that were I thought rich enough to be recast into that fiction. Uh, I used
right,
them, so I mined that material, but
right,
I
right.
had to unlearn a lot of the craft.
Okay. Well, Chandrahas, you also were talking about how life experience is so important,
Yes.
and how, I mean, you in fact said that you were so grateful for having been born into the time and the particular segment of society that you were, because that's
Yes.
also about the life experience that you then had. So, can you share with us what were the kind of particular learnings you had as you were growing into being the writer
Oh,
you wanted to be?
yes. Mm. I think I want to echo Sampurna. Sometimes you need some of being a writer is unlearning what your society or your family has given you. In my case, I think it was unlearning some of my middle class attitudes and inhibitions. And the much bigger thing for which I'm extremely grateful for writing, for pushing me out, because you can sometimes live, if you're middle class in India, you can live in a little bubble and no one disturbs, no one has any problem with that. But if you want to be a writer, very soon you find that if you don't mix and learn how to mix with all sorts of folk, you have very limited sort of range in your work, and that becomes very frustrating. And every time in my life I've tried to break a wall down, some a wall that was either constructed without my permission or which I had myself had set up, I found incredible rewards. And I think I would encourage some of you to join this course only for that reason, to give you, to share some of these stories and stuff. Out of one of these gestures came my most recent book, Days of My China Dragon. At some point in my 20s, I was a very docile and obedient son. And when my mother was working in the same city, said, live with me, I said, of course, not realizing what a huge problem this was going to be for me. And some years later, we had a big fight, and I decided it was time to leave. And I just finished my first book. So I finally had a bit of money to afford an apartment in Bombay. And the day I moved into this tiny rundown little place in Dadar, I went down to eat. I walked into the first restaurant I saw, which I'd passed so many times in my life and never gone into, but now I lived next door to it, so I had to go. And it was a Chinese restaurant. And over the next 2 years, I had so many incredible experiences in this place, including being there at opening time and closing time on the same day, very often. I virtually lived there half the time. And the best gift I could ever give myself was that I became friends of the proprietor and all the waiters, none of whom had ever read a book in their lives. And I suddenly had a life completely outside of literature, and had amazing access to stories. And I realized what a binding thing food is, and how many people come to a restaurant with all sorts of different expectations. Some people don't even come to a restaurant to eat. It's very strange to think about this, but you don't. You want to sit somewhere, you want to see some other people's faces. And I felt so much at home. One of the problems of being a writer, especially if you're a full-time writer, is that it's a very lonely life often, and your sociality has to be self-constructed. There's no institution to support you, no faces you're going to see every morning. And suddenly I had this one institution where I was still very young, and I'll tell you what made me the most proud, more proud than anything else. Sometimes the customers would see a little book on top of the galla. There's a place in every restaurant where the proprietor has his computer, he plays some music, there's a cash counter and stuff. On that, there was Arzi the Dwarf in this restaurant in Bombay. And the customers would ask, why is this book over there? They've never seen a book in a restaurant. There is no book in any Indian restaurants other than a few cookbooks somewhere. And the proprietor would point at me and say, ye to paas mein rehta hai, isne likha.
Wow.
And I was like the house writer of the China Dragon. And this made me so inexplicably happy that I would sometimes I would wait looking at all the customers. Why don't they ask about this book? They just pay and leave. What is wrong with them? So in a way, I think, we live in a very interesting society. Once you make the decision to be a writer, you will give yourself so many tools and so many incentives to go out there and to explore. Even your own street, there's an amazing essay by the sociologist Didi Kosambi, in which he makes an ethnography of his own street. That's all. 200 meters from where you live. You can write an entire book about this world. The caste, religion, history, gender, all these things are like amazing lenses in which you look at the world. So once you give yourself a little chance to think about this week after week and make little baby steps forward, within 2 or 3 months, you can make so much progress in becoming a writer.
Right. Listen, I'm going to just interrupt this conversation briefly to say I've just received a message from Sampurna. Her father has not been well. They brought him back from hospital just last week, and I was incredibly grateful that she joined us at all, but she just had to rush off because she got a message that she's feeling very, very unwell. So I'm very sorry, and I'm feeling terrible about it, but Sampurna's had to leave. But we're going to carry on because luckily enough, Chandrahas has received any such intimation, and I'm hoping that he will not till we finish. So, so Chandrahas, you were talking to us about. I mean, I love the fact that you brought in the China Dragon book, because in a way, I feel that after that book, you also expanded your sort of writing subject. You became remember so many festivals where you were also talking about writing about food, writing about the culture of food,
Yes,
and also, of course, travel. And these two things are so intrinsically linked. And it would
yes,
be great if you, at some point, could read something to us, something that you would like to read, but also
yes,
talk to us about how you kind of segued into these two areas.
yes. Um, I'll tell you one of the greatest things about being a writer is that you are, or you aim to be, a very competent amateur. You have no professional skills that you can put on a card. And this is your greatest gift. You have no degree, no qualification, nothing. All you have is the ability and the desire to go out and explore a subject and work at it till you can put it down on 2 or 3 pages, or if you're writing a book on 200 or 300 pages each time you decide the scale of projects. And in a way, this gives you a huge amount of power as a human being, I've realized, because you kind of make the journey, the transition from no knowledge to some knowledge to more knowledge to ability to write about that knowledge to ability to publish about that knowledge, and for other people to then report back to you. It's a kind of feedback loop between within yourself and then between yourself and readers. Going through the cycle is very pleasurable. Some days, imagine that you can take, as in my case, you can take a scientific book about the history of Indian mangoes, go to a little cafe in Kolkata, sit there the entire morning listening to music and writing little notes and call it work. And after that, go off like I did once on a 2-week trip across the subcontinent. You call up all your friends saying, what is your favorite mango? Based on you pool all the responses, then say, I can go from here to there, this bit by train, this bit by plane, this bit by auto, this bit, I take someone along, this bit I go by myself. And you have a little journey of the entire country in a summer, eating new kinds of mango every day. And if right, I just gave a talk recently to a bunch of students I have in Iowa. The title of it was, is literature a form of writing or a form of living?
Very lovely talk. Yeah, very lovely
And
subject. I mean,
yes, I think I'm proud of my title. Maybe my talk was a little bit more unfocused than this, but I think the title focuses uh, the connection of writing to living.
yeah.
And the fact that the two, once you open the doors to them, it's a continuous dialogue between one and the other, which becomes a very fruitful way of living. And I'm very grateful to writing, not just because it's a vocation of mine, but when I was in my teens and 20s, I was extremely introverted and unable to make connections with people. It frustrated me a lot. Maybe it doesn't look a bit like that now. I think I've taken the most roundabout route to extroversion of anybody I know. But at the time, I was very grateful for a chance to make progress as a human being by meeting non-threatening people in books who could never tell you, now you dance, now you sing, now you do this, now you do that, the way adults would do to me, and I didn't know how to respond to them.
Yeah.
I didn't have a language for life, but I had a language for literature. And based on learning from in reading novels, which I think is the highest art form, although I might work in other ones, you do
Mm.
experience all sorts of very complicated situations in a vicarious manner. You experience what it's like to be a woman, to be from another state or another country, to live in a village. This is why my favorite writer is the Bengali writer Bhibhuti Bhushan of all time, because you never know from reading some of his stories who the writer actually is. He's like a chameleon who disappears into his stories. And this is the skill I envy and admire the most among writers, to disappear. It's a kind of freedom from egotism, actually. The ego is such a big thing in our lives, and often we are not able to get around it. In writing stories, you learn to give yourself up, in reading them as well, and you become someone else for a little while. And that little insight into somebody else's mind and world, I think, is an amazing gift to have. It teaches you so many things that you can take back into your life. So for all
Yeah.
those who want to join this course, I want to say, don't just think of it as something concrete about, even if you finish it, not no further ahead in your project to write better, but with a greater awareness of what it means to live and to think. That in itself is amazing. And
Yeah.
for that,
And
you already have
Sanjeev,
amazing people. I think the one of the reasons why I was very excited to work on this was the chance to work with Anjum and Ramandeep, and to come to Kolkata. Whenever you can start again in-person courses, I'll come to Kolkata once a week
yes,
for a
yes,
week.
yes. We're going to start. I'm hoping we're going to start quite soon. But yeah,
Mm.
Chandrahas, what you said about being able to disappear into another life as a writer.
Mm.
But writer also creates that ability for the readers to disappear
Yes.
into another life. I
Yes.
mean, that's one of the great things about reading and about literature is that you're sitting in one place, but you're traveling very far away and you're traveling into so many other lives and so many other realities, you know.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think it's a tremendous, I mean, this whole question of living and writing, it's not just for the writer, but it's also for the reader. So you're
Yes.
creating something that allows the reader also to live so many lives and to identify so well with other people, right?
Yes, and just as a little note, I might ask some of you, and maybe when we chat later, when you go to people's houses, social visits, do you take a look at the libraries, and do you often find that based on what you can see in that little glass cabinet and whether or not there's dust on it or not, you can tell a lot about a person's mind and world. And I always find myself looking and as soon as I see some unusual books on someone's bookshelf, I know that I'm going to meet someone. If they're not Even if they're not a very unusual person, they have some ambitions in life to learn and to grow. Whereas if I see The Alchemist, Who Moved My Cheese, Three Mistakes of My Life, Half Girlfriend and stuff, I kind of know that here's someone who just like reads off the bestseller list or doesn't have it's more disappointing to me. I mean, maybe this is a ladder on which everyone makes their way up, but
Right.
what books can give you as an alternative lives in this world is incredible.
Yeah. Chandrahas, on that note, maybe you can read something for us and then we move on to questions. I can see quite a few questions
Hmm.
waiting for us.
I would usually read. I'm just reluctant a little bit to do so because, in conversations like this, sometimes it's hard for people to pay attention. Maybe
To
I'll read just
focus
a
on
couple of
reading.
paragraphs.
No, just a little bit, just to give a sort of taste of
Um,
what you're
well,
reading from.
I'm going to read from Days of My China Dragon, partly because it has a Kolkata connection. When I came for the book launch 2 years ago, where you and Dia also came, Anjum, it was the most amazing
Yeah.
time in a I think it was one of the greatest nights of my life. I can't recall
Honestly.
feeling that my entire journey in food of the last 10 years had come together in this book, coming in one of Kolkata's most amazing Chinese restaurants. And if we ever
Yeah.
do an in-person course in Kolkata, I insist that we have 2 sessions over there.
One meal together there.
Yes, yes,
Perfect.
yes, yes.
Done,
Food
done.
and literature must go
Yeah.
together, and writing and eating are very closely connected. I think best about
True.
writing when I eat.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm going to
Yeah.
read. I was telling you about growing as a human being, and that's why this story is very dear to my heart. Anjum, you've heard it before, so it'll be a little boring for you. Shiv Bhakt Pintu Masurkar. I also call it a portrait of a waiter as a young man, and this entire book is told in the voice of the proprietor of the restaurant, the proprietor of the China Dragon. So every story begins with him making some notes, and every story is about either a customer, a waiter, or something that goes on in his life. In this one, he's talking about this waiter who came to work in the restaurant and what happened in his life.
Right.
For many months after he first came to work at the China Dragon, the general consensus among the staff was that every day was potentially the waiter Pintu Masurkar's last day at work. The joke amongst them, which often reached Pintu's ears and made him smile with a mixture of embarrassment and self-pity, was that Pintu had in his wallet a permanent unreserved ticket back to his hometown, Kolhapur, on the Yashwantpur Express, which leaves Dadar station at 4 o'clock every afternoon. The day he was fired, at least he would be home to his mummy before midnight, unless he got off at the wrong station. Not that there was a problem with Pintu's attitude, as there's always been and always will be among staff members at my restaurant and in the restaurant industry in general. Pintu didn't want all the good gigs of the restaurant life, like getting to ride the bicycle for home deliveries. And nor was he always angling for a raise, as some people are. He took no pleasure in watching someone else get ticked off, as he could well have done given how often he was in trouble himself. He had no bad habits like chewing gutka or drinking thara, and I know that he sent half his salary home to his family each month. Even when he was no longer the junior most of the waiters, he was still the last to serve himself from the pot of staff food. And not only did Pinto not take any extra days off, even on his weekly day off, he could sometimes be seen hanging around the restaurant, pathetically lonely and ill at ease without the very folk who pulled his leg so relentlessly, for this lost soul had no other friends. No, Pinto's problem was just that he was so eager, so sweet, so nervous, and so out of place in Bombay. Forget doing work, he had so many complexes, insecurities, reservations, and doubts that just being a body in space and time was a matter of continuous difficulty for him. For his work, he had to wear a white shirt, black pants, and a black waistcoat. And just this beginning unnerved him. He who had worn cast offs from his older brother all his life and thought that only rich people wore a second layer of clothing. Now Pinto was a well dressed waiter in a good class of restaurant, but he did not have the personality or confidence to play this beginner's role in the theater of restaurant life. Or maybe as a director, I was not good enough. Who knows? Also, coming from a small town in a dal bhat sabzi kind of background, Pinto had no understanding of what Chinese food was about. So he could not explain the ingredients and styles of different dishes to the customers with any conviction, other than murmuring things like gravy dish or dry mix, very good when pressed, which can hardly be the way to work up anyone's appetite or get them to order the kinds of dishes that make profits for the house. My argument to Pinto that nobody in India actually knows what real Chinese food is all about, Pinto, especially customers. It's all a big con game, and you are just another player. This had no effect on Pinto. He had first to jump through the hoops of Bombay and restaurant life before he could get to Chinese, which is a lot to ask for any traveler on this, our long, twisting, noodle like road of life. Okay, that's it. That's all of Pinto. For the rest, you can just roll down to your bookshop. It's only 350 rupees, I think.
No, thank you very much. That was wonderful. I mean, Chinese food is my favorite food. And I can just imagine Pinto in my head trying to explain some of the intricacies of a dish to me when I'm asking
Yes.
awkward questions. So thank you very much for that. We'd like to now invite some of the people who are here with us into
Yes.
this conversation. Raman, how should we do it? Would you want me to start reading out some of the questions from the chat, or do you have some other way of doing it? I can see Biju here with us. Biju was part of our course last time,
Oh,
and nice to see him joining. Vaishali was also there as part of our course last time. She's a very competent writer herself.
very good.
First book, I think, is almost out.
Before,
Oh, I see
before,
lots of us.
yeah, I should say, I think this might be one of the few times that we do an online course, unless we also continue that. So for some of you who are not in Kolkata, if afterwards you join this course, then, you'll always feel like some of the people meet in person and they are have to have fun that we don't have. But this is one chance where it'll be the same for everybody. So I think this will be the good time for you to join from different parts of the country. And then we have a pan-Indian sort of writing group, isn't it? Which is great fun for us too.
Yeah. Okay, so I see that we've been joined by quite a lot of people, which is lovely. Does anybody want to ask a question? Because there is somebody had already put in an interesting question. There were several waiting for us. So
I can see some on the chats, Anjum.
Yeah. Can you? So what do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That will save you the. I will read them out so everyone can see, and that will save you the trouble of having to. How important? Yes. Somebody asked, how important is it to have the reader's interest in mind while writing? Or can one write simply as a form of self-expression and hope it's still interesting to others? This is a good question, the question of an audience. It depends on what one is writing. And for that reason, I always insist, even if you're a serious writer, that everyone should keep a diary. Writing for yourself is a pleasure completely separate from writing for others. And in writing down one's own thoughts, one learns the practice of putting down a few hundred words every day, which is a great use when you start writing for people. How important is it to have the reader's interest? There's many different kinds of readers. So other than imagining a certain reader, for instance, when I write novels, I imagine 5 or 10 people whom I know very well, including Anjum. And if I feel when I finish that they're going to like it, I don't really care about the other, every writer, for some reason, that is still a mystery to me. And I'm not lying or being dishonest when I say this. So many people are interested in being bestsellers that, and having those 10, 15, 20,000 readers that I've always felt that, as a writer, no matter in some however many readers you have, At any one time, you only have one reader. There's only one reader reading your book. The experience of literature
Right.
is solitary. And you only need to impress that one person and give them something at that time. That you've already done your duty as a writer by that. How many people join after that? It really is really of, it's of economic consequence, but it's not of aesthetic or moral consequence.
Right.
So if you can find, if you know someone who reads well and you can think of them while writing, and that is more than enough. You don't need to think about a generalized reader or to do tricks to impress. I just think that is an unnatural and self-defeating way to write.
Right.
Think of pleasing
Uh,
yourself and hold yourself to a high standard. Between these two things, you will write well.
Great. Thank you. There seem to be quite a stream of questions. You want to take something else from the chat box,
Yes,
Chandrahas? There's
yes.
one question about a book that's just been released. I released my first book in October last year and realized getting people to read is much more difficult than writing. Also, you expect friends and close family to read and give feedback so that you can improve, but all they do is end up congratulating you to encourage you. How do you cope with this? Maybe you can talk about this with us.
Yes, yes. I'm willing to answer all these questions, but whenever I hear a question from somebody about writing, uh, I also feel like asking them a question in return.
Yes.
What is it about writing that makes you want to be a writer? Is it the act of writing, or is it the pleasure of having been a writer and being able to call yourself that? And depending on where you stand, I think everybody has a little bit of both. It's not as if anybody is so pure or so impure that they're completely commercial and just want people to read them, or they are so in their own heads that they just want to write. But if let me tell you, by the way, that if at all some of you do enter Indian literature and you start getting invited to festivals and you meet supposedly your cohort, you will find that even 6 months after you've written your book, 99% of the other writers you meet will not have read it. And so when you start talking, I release my book, whatever, you'll find that you are just skating on thin ice, because everybody's so keen to see what you know, and it becomes horrible to have conversations with other writers. There's many writers I don't meet just because I know I haven't read their last book. Thankfully, our common good friend Kunal Basu is a very generous and wonderful person, not one of them, Kolkata writer. So you are saying in this question, you expect friends and close family to read and give feedback so you can improve. They feel congratulating you is enough to encourage you. Let me tell you, first of all, very frankly, even lots of people who were serious readers, it disappoints me a lot to say it, but many people I knew 10 years ago were extremely serious readers and read one book a week. Now, on the weekends, they watch Netflix series, binge watching or whatever. It's not a moral criticism of them. Everyone can do whatever they like, and maybe TV is so wonderful these days that you don't need. But when everybody is headed off towards a visual medium, including serious readers, how do you expect your own friends sometimes to sit down? Just because you are their friend doesn't mean that they should read your book, to be very frank. And it's better. I understand without readers, it's very hard to get the motivation. Perhaps that's one of the reasons to join a course like this, because everyone will have to read each other's work and you will get feedback which you can't get in other places. Beyond that, don't have a huge expectation of friends and family or pressure them. Instead, you could call your friends, 2 or 3 of whom you trust, and before you publish, say, can you read my book so that any improvements you make will help me improve it when I do publish? That gives them an incentive to help you. Whereas now you're kind of somewhat forcing it down their throat, and some people will just, people also run away from things. They'll tell you that they've read it when they haven't, or they'll tell you it's wonderful. In this matter, Indian papas and mummies are the worst. I don't know of any Indian mother or father who doesn't think if their son is a writer, dancer, whatever, that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread was invented. And so this can also be a problem with your friends. They will tell you it was really wonderful, I enjoyed it so much, or they'll ask you, why wasn't I in it? And things like that. So
Yeah.
it's a complicated space, and I think rather than tie yourself in knots in it, it's better to find another place alongside it so that you can go between these places, if you know what I mean.
Right. Right. Chandrahas, there's an interesting question here that says, we often say there are moments very vital in one's life that cannot be expressed.
Yes.
As an author, how do you manage, or does anybody who's an author manage to express such emotions?
Ah, this
You
is a
know,
wonderful question.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, if you think about it, very often we are at a loss to
Yes.
explain many things.
It's a good question because it shows you what the limits of literature are. One of the problems of language, especially when you get to a very high level, is how does language record that the inexpressible or the unlinguistic?
Right.
Uh, and this is why, for instance, sometimes films are wonderful. There's some screenplays where, or some scenes you see in films where the characters don't say anything, they just look at each other. And often screenwriters are criticized for writing too much dialogue. Just leave the room for the characters. The audience empathizes naturally with faces. So if people can interpret a glance by themselves, and when you put a word into a scene, it makes it banal, whereas a look is so much more meaningful. And a look has the full force of a human life behind it, whereas words merely are a small fragment of language. Um, I'll answer you with a specific example. In Arzi the Dwarf, I don't mind giving away some of the plot. At one point, poor Arzi, who already feels very sort of gloomy in life, suddenly finds out that he's adopted. He's not a biological child of his mother, and he's not known this his entire life. And for many weeks, I struggled to give him a reaction. What does he do in that moment? What does he say? Because he does say something. I knew that the personality that he does say something, but everything that you put in a moment like that seems to make it terrible. This is, oh my God, oh mommy, what is this? And stuff like it has been done to death so many times, and especially in Hindi films when like heroes are always talking, being disappointed, the mother's always being disappointed. I just couldn't work it out. And finally, I put in 5 letters separated by a hyphen. UG-BUH, Akbar. And it's a complete nonsense word. But I kind of felt if you just leave a sound there, readers will put in to it whatever they would experience in a similar situation. You're leaving an open canvas. Usually you're articulating all the emotions and giving cues for the readers. But in a situation like this where there's already so much pressure on the scene, you don't need to explain a lot. Just give a cue, and we have enough experience of life and emotions to be able to feel the pain of that moment, including the fact that somebody who loves to talk can't make a meaningful sound in that situation.
Wow, that's a
So
wonderful example, Chandrahas. Thank you. I mean, both for addressing the complexity of that and also then the kind of way in which you found a solution. Thanks a
mm,
lot. We just have a few minutes left to go.
sure.
And so I wanted to reiterate for everybody who's listening in today that we will be starting the second round of this creative writing course in a few days' time. And it would be wonderful if you spread the word or if you're interested in joining, because I feel that between Chandrahas and Sampurna Chattarji, who's unfortunately had to rush off because her father's not well, and Shumona Roy, who's going to come back as guest faculty again this time, and the kind of inputs that they will bring. This is a opportunity which is very, very rare, because you really get to get into the mind of a writer and to understand from people who've actually been there, done that, walked the path of being a writer, succeeded at it, plugged away at it for years. Uh, you get to understand the craft and the art. And I see that some of the questions that are still waiting for us to be answered are questions about craft and art. How do I learn to do this? How do I learn to do that? What will make me do this better? So these are things that it's not very easy to answer in a half a minute or a minute
Yes.
in a conversation like this. But it would be wonderful if you are really serious about it to try and come and be part of a longer process, which is a little more in depth and helps you address these questions.
Yes.
So I want to thank Chandrahas for being here with us. I want to thank Sampurna, who will see this recording at some point and follow the rest of the conversation, for having really been able to participate in what to me was a very, very interesting conversation about writing. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Are there any last minute questions from any of the people who are here with us in Zoom. Sumit, you want to say something?
I see many more questions. What should we do about them? Just leave them
Oh,
for
are
another
there?
time? Yes.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
see.
I think we should take them, Chandrahas, because the chat Anjum is very, very interesting and people are really keen to know. Sumit
You
has
Hmm.
know,
very kindly agreed to
Raman,
even
I've been seeing the questions here. Chandras, why don't you pick in, just
Okay.
go ahead and see which
Hmm.
ones.
As you can see, I love talking about writing. I actually love talking about writing with other people who, and because of lockdown and living far away, I miss these kinds of conversations. I'm happy to go on for a little while, another 10, 15 minutes, if it's no problem to you. Plus, I think it gives us a taste of all the things we can do in an online course, isn't it? This is what we are going to have to do in the next 2, 3 months. I find it easier to teach in person, but this can be nice too. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions. As some of you may have guessed with my previous comments about book sales, I'm not interested in answering questions about best-selling and becoming and stuff. You will have to sort that out by yourselves. I'm sorry to sound so strict, but I really cannot give anybody any advice on how to become a bestseller other than buying 2 or 3,000 copies of a book by yourself. Sometimes it's not that expensive. Uh, People sometimes find me a bit rude on this, but I think this is not, I'm sorry to say, it's not the main thing about being a writer. Some other people have
Right.
other motivations, but you will not get any valuable answers out of me. So no point in getting there. There's many other steps before that.
And also, I'm pretty what's going to make you a bestseller. I mean, it's like you want to
Yes.
be, if you want to put in the hard work and produce something worthwhile, and then you have to see how it's taken, right? You can't start by saying that this is a bestseller I'm producing. Even if you write to formula, Chandrahas, would you agree? Even if
Yes.
you try and write to formula, there's no
Yes.
guarantee of your work
I know.
becoming.
And think of all the people and Hindi movies who do make films to formula and it never is a hit. So, there's no point in, I would say to you, if you're joining the course, try and find some other motivation because all the sales can come later. There's so much other things to do and to enjoy about writing that why make yourself dependent on the tyranny of the market? I mean, it's just, it makes life bitter and painful, in my opinion. I mean, let me be very frank to you. I don't think, other than one book of mine, any book of mine has sold more than 15,000 copies. And I don't care if it does. I want to write. I want the people who like my writing to read me, and I want to write for myself. So anyway, enough of that. Someone says, I love writing, but I find it so hard to finish something I've written. Does this happen to anyone else? I think it happens to everybody. It happens to everybody, and the way around it is either to write everything in one burst, even if you write it very badly, and slowly get back to it, or to write one small, like giving yourself a little bar of chocolate, to write one small piece of chocolate every day. That's what I do when I'm writing novels. I know I have to write 80,000 words, 100,000 words. I set myself a goal 5 days a week from 9 to 12 in the morning. I'm going to try and write 500 words in the morning. I do have the advantage of a routine, and I know that every morning I'm there at 9 o'clock, absolutely focused, and this is what I really want to do, and I'm grateful for the time, and over time I become better and better at it. But in finishing something, first of all, you have to decide, is it a small piece? If it's 800 or 900 words, I don't see why you should have a problem in finishing it. Is it that you're not really that interested? Is it that you don't know what to say? These are all different problems with different answers and solutions. So sometimes the question, I think if you join the course, you will find that if nothing else, after 3 months, when you write the same question again in a group discussion, you will be able to give more depth and detail to your question. And sometimes asking a question a right way is itself part of the answer. If you ask a question that's very general, it's very hard for someone who doesn't know you. I don't know if you're lazy, whether you need motivation, whether you don't have the right brand of laptop. I find many women I meet these days seem to have a MacBook, and without it, they don't want to be a writer. So these can all be different issues. Is that you that I'm?
Yeah, Leela.
Hello.
Yeah. Do you want to say something more? I think it helps to have some audience conversation as well. Yeah. Do say more.
Right.
So basically, when I write something, like if I get an idea for a story, I generally find it like super easy to have a nice. According to me, I like what I come up with for an idea for the beginning of a story, and
Yes.
the of a story, but then in the middle I really go blank and I'm like, what do I write in the middle? Like what can I do to make it interesting? Because I can find points in the beginning that match the ending and make it like a nice twist thing, but the middle I don't know what to write.
Well, seems like an interesting way to work. I'll give you one answer and then ask you one question. Often when I begin a novel, I know the beginning and the ending, but I don't know the middle. So I'm going to spend the next 3 years trying to discover what the middle is, with some general sense that I know which direction I'm going in. You know, if you started out in Kolkata and you wanted to go to Bombay, you could go through the north, through the south, through the center of India, and you could take many routes, and each one would give you something interesting. But if you didn't know that you wanted to land up in Bombay, then, you know, it would be a little strange. I mean, if somebody was waiting for you in Bombay, they would be very upset if you didn't show up. But as another kind of answer, in 2 sentences, give us your beginning and give us your ending. What of any story? Let's hear it.
Of like any story that I've written?
Yes, yes.
Well, that's the thing. I've never like, there's only like one story I've written that I've actually finished, but I was 11 when I wrote that.
How old are you now?
I'm 16.
Well, I know it's terrible for older people to sound like this. You've got such a long way to go and such a long way to learn that just being interested in writing at this stage is more than enough for you. You're doing very well.
Thank you.
What class are you in?
I'm going to be in 12th grade next month.
And what do you want to study at university?
Well, English. I want to continue in writing.
I can guarantee you that if you get into a good English degree and you study books for 3 years, by the time you're 20 or 21, when you finish your degree, this will not at all be a problem for you, because you're going to have to write so many essays, you're going to read so many stories, you're going to live so much, you're going to meet so many people. Actually, I'm sorry that I said so many random things in answer to your question when I had not met you, because now that I have, I can say that you just need to wait a little bit. And just to be interested in writing, give yourself, if you can afford it, I don't know what your pocket money is at your age. I was in trouble over these things. If you can afford the course, come and join and meet. You know, you can see already, I can see in the chat, there's some older people, there's people from in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Meet this entire group of...
I was in the first course that happened.
Nina was one of our students in the first batch, and she did participate very actively, actually. I think you got a merits thing for that also, Leela. Yeah. So, but Leela, as Chandrahas was saying, the next round is going to be, as if you are persistently interested in writing, there's lots of new stuff, because you've got new people coming in. So
I think I'll join. I was actually like, I was listening to you and I was like, I think I'll join the second batch too.
I'll tell you what I'll offer to do. I'm supposed to teach only 2 classes, though, as you can see, I like to chat about almost any aspect of writing. After my 2 classes, whoever is on the course, I'll allow them to write me one question, and we can all meet on Zoom and address each one of those questions, so that you have an extra class of very practical matters. And we can have a discussion just like this, but at the back end of the course, when you've gone through some of the other rigors and met some of the other writers. And, you know, I don't want you to learn, my answers could be wrong for you. Who knows? Other writers' answers could be right for you. Go through it all, and we can have a little review session at the end, which will be good.
That's a wonderfully generous offer, Chandrahas. Thank you so much. I think that would be great.
So I have a selfish interest here. I like meeting people, and as soon as you, as I said, when you can have physical classes, I want to eat Chinese food in Kolkata every morning in Chinatown, and then do a little bits of teaching.
Don't worry about that. We're going to do that the minute you show up, and you type the rest, whichever restaurant.
Okay. Shall I answer 2 more questions and be done?
Yeah. So
yes, please ask.
You want to ask something?
You are muted.
You have to unmute it.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I wanted to know, to be able to recommend the course, that does the course cover how to get your writing noticed? Does the course answer how to...
the publication and dissemination part of it?
Whichever way to get it noticed,
Yeah. So basically, last time when we did the course, we did also have people like literary agents and publishers talking about how this works and how you can make it. We had also sessions on doing your own publishing and podcasts. This time round, this particular course is going to focus on the craft of writing. how to
Okay.
write better. And we have a separate course called From Manuscript to Published Book, which is going to deal with people who are absolutely, who are at the stage where they've got something ready or almost ready that they wish to get published or take out into the world. And that process of how you do that and also work on your manuscript is a more specialized thing for different, not, I won't say older, it could be any age group, but for people who are different phase, at a different phase of their writing. So the course that we're talking about here is a course which draws you into writing and exploring your ability or your interest in writing. If you have that, that sort of instinct that this is something you'd like to know more about or explore.
But if I could
And
quickly
Anjum,
ask with the answer with the counter question, what according to you, I'm interested in this answer for everybody, what according to you is getting noticed? What would count as getting noticed for you?
see, I think one of the things that many writers who have approached me and I don't have a good answer for them is how do you get a publisher to read your work and then be interested and give it a fair reading? So
Yes.
almost everybody believes that the publisher didn't give it a fair chance. Okay,
Because
and
they were
I
rejected.
suspect, yeah, because they were, see, I mean, you scratch a Bengali, there's a writer there. So everybody
That's a great
wants to be
opening
a
line
writer.
of a book. I hope you will use it. Otherwise, someone is going to steal it from the guaranteed from this.
I might use it for a play. So the other thing I want to tell Anju and Ramanji is we are looking for playwrights and anybody who can write a plot. The worst thing about plays writers is it has no plot. There isn't a well thought through plot, which I think novelists are doing well, but playwrights are not. So I'm actually was keen on knowing whether there'll be talent or we'd like to offer to anybody who completes the course, please write us a play.
Right. So here's one thing I want to say. Chandrahas, by the way, me introduce you to a new friend of mine, Sumit Lai Roy, who is a dyed-in-the-wool theatre person. He's been doing theatre in Calcutta and in Bombay since he was a teenager. And as you can see, very well no longer a teenager, left those years long behind him. But
you have theatre hair.
Yeah.
Yes. So now, Sumit, just to say that one of the courses we are going to be offering is Mahesh Tattani doing a 10 session on writing for performance. So this could be for an actor who wants to develop a monologue. This could be for somebody who has a script. This could be for a story which someone wants to turn into a screenplay or even a script. As you know, Mahesh is a very experienced playwright. And so if you know anybody who wants to do this, you can certainly recommend the course and you might end up with getting lots of very good scripts.
That's what, so what we're offering is that whenever that script is on, I mean, Ramanji herself can produce it, but we'll be very happy to produce it internationally now. Meaning,
okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Chandrahas, we're going to do that. We're going to get somebody in the course to actually come up with a script that Sumit is going to produce. Isn't that
wonderful.
great?
This is how people get together to get forward.
Yeah.
This is an advantage in theatre, which sadly the writing doesn't allow. It's one of the terrible things about writing. Unless you make efforts, you don't have the chance to have dialogues with people that take you forward, which in theatre, you realize in working collaboratively how much those dialogues are essential to introspection and improvement.
No, Chandrahas, I have to tell you that some of the best scripts I've read had no dialogue.
Yes.
But it was very well written in terms of the movement. That makes for pretty good theatre.
Actually, I meant the dialogue of people with each other.
I see. Okay. Yeah,
you can have a dialogue about how to make a scene with no dialogue.
Great. So I think, is anybody else very eager to ask a question?
I see a last question from Tabati Gupta. Is this person still here? Do you want me to answer it?
Yes, please do.
My question is regarding self-assessment. Recently, I wrote a little piece on the cyclone and how my favorite tree was uprooted. I thought it was one of the best things I wrote, but a friend who was very critical inside was disappointed about the second half, about the first half. She thought I was superb in the second half. I was disappointed and also worried, but did not quite understand what she meant. Should I take the remarks seriously or was I not critical enough? Some of you have been in married or at least have been in relationships other than perhaps the people who are under 18 in this group. Though these days, I find even 12-year-olds say they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I don't know what's happening to Indian society. But if one took seriously every remark made by one's partner about oneself, you'll soon be in a blue funk of depression. You've got to hold your own a little bit and not be so. This is what I meant about taking feedback. If one takes all kinds of feedback from all sorts of people, then in the end, one is left with a mishmash. Everybody reading can be very subjective. So if you think you enjoyed writing this piece, just the fact that you had fun writing it, was it better doing that or sitting and watching a TV show or having a nap or whatever? Just the act of writing itself presumably was very fruitful and made you bring out certain thoughts about trees, about weather, about your own city that perhaps you wouldn't have done. If after that your friend liked half of it, I have many friends who don't like anything I write. That's why I don't even show them things I write. I know I'm going to get nowhere with them. So don't make too much of it is my advice. If they liked a bit of what you wrote, that's good enough. If you liked what you wrote, that's very good. And which is the way forward.
Yes, I think that answers my question. I'm satisfied.
Okay, that's good. I feel like a doctor.
Great.
It's nice to feel like a doctor.
So we shot our time quite well, but very fruitfully, I think. And it was nice. I see that Madhurima has also joined us. And I don't know how much of the conversation Madhurima was. She's a soon-to-be published writer, Chandrahas. Wow. And she was part of our last course as well.
We should congratulate her.
And
this
she
is wonderful.
happens to be a doctor also, by the way.
Wow. It's the best profession for becoming a writer.
Is there something you wanted to ask or say before we say our goodbyes?
Me?
I was talking to Madhurima, but I don't see her around.
Yes.
So, let me see if I don't think she has got I don't think she's here in terms of having really put on her audio. So let's just wind this up by saying a big thank you once again to Chandrahas for being so generous and sharing your time and really engaging in the conversation. It was great fun. Thank you very, very much. And I'd like to thank Sampurna in her absence. Poor thing, she must be really stressed out and tense right now. I will get in touch with her to find out how everything is at home. But thank you to all of you and for being part of this discussion. I hope to see you again anon. And till we meet again. Okay?
Yes.
Raman, you want to just say our goodbyes from TCAA?
Yes, and from my side, I will hope to see some of you in April when I'm teaching my 2 classes on the art of travel writing, which to me, is one of the best ways to learn how to look at the world. So it'll be great to see some of you all then, and also perhaps to meet in the future.
Right, and have that Chinese meal in the restaurant.
Yes, Chinese is very important.
Thank you so much, Anjum. Thank you, Chandrahas. And I love the idea of food and literature and some writing ideas happening over food and dinners and teas and coffees, and all of you together giving shape to everyone's ideas. Right. I think the webinar must have been meaningful for our audiences all over. Looking forward to seeing you all at the course, creating together and giving shape to things together. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.